very simple. This session has been organized by the African Commission, the AU, in partnership with the Republic of Kenya as the host government, as well as the International High-Level Panel on Water Investment for Africa. And you hear more about what that is. This session is going to be chaired by the Honorable Minister, Professor Hani Sewin, who is also the President of the African Ministerial Council on Water, AMCO, as well as the Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation in Egypt. So for now, let me invite Beatrice, who is going to welcome the Minister to begin the session.
Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to welcome you this morning to this Lenana presentation space and the first of 4 sessions that will be running back to back over the next few hours. As you've heard from Alex, we are running behind schedule, but we are going to try to keep within the limited time as much as possible. Now, the potential for change in Africa is immense, and this potential will shine through all our sessions today. Potential also requires investment, be it time, be it money, or thought. And now to look at how to accelerate climate resilient water investment, it is my immense pleasure to welcome the Honorable Hani Sewin, the President of the Africa Ministerial on Water, who is also the Minister for Water Resources and Irrigation from Egypt. Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize also for the delay. I would like to start by thanking His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, for his very inspiring speech today morning. That's really very motivating to start with such a wonderful speech. Let me also thank the Kenyan government for hosting this important summit on climate and also the African Union for dedicating a session on increasing climate resilient water investments. Colleagues, water plays a crucial role in the socio-economic development of Africa and in sustaining natural ecosystems. It's also critical in building climate resilience among communities on the continent. The prolonged periods of droughts in many parts of Africa recorded in the past 50 years has resulted in loss of livelihoods, hunger affecting more than 36 million people, with more populations migration to other places. Lack of investments in water has affected the gains made across all the sustainable development goals. While significant progress has been made on such impacts on the continent, financing and investment in water is lacking. It's estimated that at least $30 billion additional finance needs to be mobilized annually by 2030 to meet SDG 6 targets on water and sanitation. Currently, only $10 to $19 billion is invested each year. The mandate of the International High-Level Panel on Water Investments for Africa is to drive global political mobilization and international engagement to meet the socio-economic needs of the continent, achieve SDG 6 and other water-related goals, and address the challenge of climate change. Allow us to start with opening remark. I think we do have some changes in the participation, but let me invite Her Excellency Honorable Minister Alice Wahome, Cabinet Secretary, Minister for Water, Sanitation and Irrigation in Kenya, and thank her also for hosting us here. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Henry, for those brief remarks for the opening of this particular session. We are discussing about water investment in the infrastructure, for sanitation, for water, and also for irrigation. In respect of Kenya, those 3 particular issues are the ones that I'll be tackling. But I want to take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you, particularly for even taking interest in this particular subject. I'm very encouraged to see the faces represented here, and I know that we will be having some good outcome. My colleagues in this panel, I want to also thank you for agreeing to be members of this panel. I have the major obligation for water, sanitation, and irrigation in Kenya to look at the challenges that Henny has gone through. One of the biggest challenges is that Kenya, like many African countries, is a water-scarce country. That, of course, has deteriorated with the impact of climate change. And therefore, when we are talking about investment, where we have come from, whether we have been investing seriously in this particular water sector, sanitation and irrigation, noting that irrigation will speak to food security. I will start by saying that if we have a gap, because we'll be discussing about the financing gap, it means we have not done sufficient investment in water, sanitation, irrigation, or even food security. The climate change has found us in that particular space where we need to completely look through and change our paradigm shift. And because I know the people represented here are both private investors and government officers at very high level of decision making in their countries, I want to challenge you. The gap that we're talking about of $30 billion US will be brought out from the government coffers, from our investment partners, private and other partners, by your own efforts, by accepting that we have taken water to either a backseat or a less important subject. And therefore, when we are talking about then the change that has been brought by the climate change itself, water has suffered the most. Without water, then you can speak of no sanitation. Then without water, you will not do much irrigation. There are those countries that are a bit ahead. There are lessons there to learn. But we are saying in Kenya that with climate change affecting our economies, our societies, environment, because of inadequate access to water, this becomes a hindrance towards achieving the SDG 6 that we're talking about. Our Agenda 2030 will not be achieved. And then, of course, Africa Union has an agenda to achieve development by water, climate change development by 2063. We could say that in terms of Africa, we may have time, but since we have lost time, we have to accelerate our steps, including changing the finance models. Look, Africa has been said to be a risky country to invest in. Who said we are a risky country if we are talking about natural resources that are still unexploited? What are the parameters that were used to turn Africa as a country where you need to de-risk the projects, you need to de-risk the investment? I think we are talking about now solutions then, where you need to balance out. You balance out, we stop the inequalities that have occurred, and we start speaking a new language that is offering solutions. For me, we need to invest and ensure that, because even water investment, and my colleagues will agree, have been said not to be bankable. I have had that language that water is not bankable. Some water projects are social, and if they are social, we reach a point where people don't have food. We have to give food. We have to give relief food. This story has gone on and on. Why not invest then in food security, meaning we increase water and then come up with new ways, technologies, systems, and ideas of management of that water, including our catchment areas, we do have several programs running for my country, including water for schools. We have irrigation projects that are farmer-led projects. We have NAWASIP, which speaks to an investment plan that will help the country to map out. We have already mapped out and agreed on what projects can be able to help us then move the country towards a better climate, taking into account that we will require a green growth, speaking to a new pathway, and to take us to the new pathway where green growth, climate financing are accepted as instruments that we need to do now and to take up now. Then it means that all of us have to bring our energies together, and this particular platform, the Africa Climate Summit, provides us with the best platform to start off. And because our president is a big champion in this particular area, and I want to thank him extremely so because of accepting to host this particular summit. And his language is very clear that we don't need to lament, we don't need to look at where the losses occurred, who caused the losses. We need now to join all of us, those who caused and those who suffered, those who consider themselves as victims, to be able to pool resources together without hindrance. Let us stop talking about risks. And this is not a language maybe investors might want to hear. But if we consider Africa and water projects as important, then we need to come to table and say we are able to invest in water and put multi-sectoral, multifaceted approaches where you can also talk of different ways of involving different approaches, including ensuring that the farmers are at the top of the game, the water catchment areas are taken care of, because, you know, I'm looking at all the rivers. We have an achievement to make. We have 300,000 kilometers that we need to bring to a new level of clean, green energy, clean, green growth. In Kenya, we know that we have our challenges in terms of pollution, in terms of devastation by the droughts, in terms of maybe some of our lifestyles like pastoralism that takes away all the, you know, that puts more cattle in an area that cannot support. The pastoralism is over. The conflicts continue to increase. So we want to speak the language that the green growth, investing in climate change, investing in water as an acceleration towards 2030, towards 2063 is what brings us here. And I'm sure by end of it all, we will, and I would want to see us looking at water as the way investments in roads, investments in electricity, in energy, investment in agriculture. How would you invest in agriculture if we don't have water? I want maybe to stop there for now so that other colleagues can have an opportunity, and finally say that I do support investment, water investment for Africa. We must meet the gap. It is us to meet this gap, and of course the infrastructure is heavy. We must look at it as a new opportunity for us, those who are private investors, to apply your funding, to apply your investment money, with the hope that there will be, of course, return on investment. I am convinced with our legal instruments, because we, as a country, we have just amended our Water Amendment Act. We've already gone through Parliament. We are now, but by September, end of September, we will finish that in the Senate. Considering water is a devolved function, we will be able to have the right instrument to support investment in water. creating water purchase agreements between the off-taker and the investor. I can assure you that wherever we are needed then to take the risk as a country, because we must continue and we must take up investment, the government has given me as the minister an assurance that the government will walk the talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for this very important keynote speech. I think you tackled very important points. I highly appreciate tackling the issue of investment in Africa, one of the most important topics among the investors. Thank you very much for tackling this issue, and also speaking about climate financing and water as an accelerator to achieve the SDGs. These are very important topics, and I thank you for this. The African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy and Action Plan 2022-2023 recognizes that building resilience of water investments in Africa is a critical response to the projected severe and more frequent impacts of climate change. The Continent of Africa Water Investment Program, adopted by the Assembly of the AU Heads of States February 2021, aims to bridge the water investment gap by mobilizing additional $30 billion as mentioned before, including blending finance instruments such as the African Cities Water Adaptation Fund. Given the gap in funding, it is vital that every dollar's use is maximized and that sufficient instruments and tools for cross-sectoral water requirements be harnessed to address both adaptation and co-benefits with mitigation. The High-Level Panel on Water Investments for Africa is currently developing an investment action plan to support the implementation of its recommendations. The investment action plan is planned to be released at the UN SDG Summit in September 2023. I had myself the pleasure to attend the high-level session organized during the COP27 for the formal inauguration of the High-Level Panel on Water with the presence of many African leaders on November 8, 2022. Also, it was an honor as an AMCAO president to witness and attend the launch of the first report of High-Level Panel on Water African Investment Program on the margins of the UN Water Conference 2023. This was, of course, March, as you all know. I think the main objectives of this session is to sensitize political leaders on the impacts of climate change on water systems and water security in Africa. Also, to sensitize the political leaders to prioritize climate resilient, efficient, and inclusive water investment in Africa, as well as to facilitate stakeholders' dialogue on enhancing climate resilient water investment in Africa. Let me invite the co-chairs of the high-level panel as the first speakers in this session. Let me start by His Excellency Honorable Karl Schrittwein, Minister of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform of Namibia, also the co-chair of High-Level Panel on Water Investments for Africa. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Honorable Chairperson, thank you very much. Honorable Minister, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I want to follow you by thanking His Excellency President Ruto for the opening remarks. I think they were absolutely spot on, with one omission, I must say, and maybe my colleague can pass it on to him. The word water missed in his speech completely. And I'm saying it because we have to face that the globe is facing a water crisis. It is not only a climate crisis. The climate crisis, as we know it, has a direct and severe effect on the water cycle. And fresh water, mind you, is the blood in the veins of the globe's life. without fresh water, development stops. In fact, we stop to live. And if we don't realize that the climate crisis agenda is completely dominated by carbon matters, by decarbonizing, and the adaptation is dominated by industrialization in neutral, carbon neutral. That's it. It does not recognize that water is development, an equal important factor in achieving these ambitions. If we do not manage to work in the water sector, the water cycle, as an equally important matter than decarbonizing and neutral carbon, then I think we are missing 50% of what we should cover. Now, if we talk about financing that, then the financing agenda must not only talk about how to finance an industry that is carbon neutral, how do we finance and invest in carbon neutral industrialization, it must also invest in clean water, in clean sanitation, in managing and maintaining the database that is needed to manage that crucial, life-giving and existential resource that we call water. Now that is only for the green water. The blue water, of course, is equally important. And again, it features only on the margins of the priorities of the climate change agenda. So we have to recalibrate that, and I hope you can bring that message to, and I'm sure he will understand. Mr. Chair, over and above the climate crisis and the gaps in the agenda, as I have tried to elucidate, we of course must recognize that as we speak about finances, we have a finance crisis. The African continent is sinking in a debt volume that it cannot sustain, let alone taking up new debt to develop the new needs that are brought about by the climate risks that we have to face. The risks are not so much in financing, like you said, the risks are now survival risks. We are not going to survive if we do not raise the funds to invest in water. But we must address the financial crisis too. The President is very correct in his analysis that we are paying far too much for our debt. We are paying far too much to excess funds. If Africa is kept where it is, one can only conclude that the current architecture of the global financing sector is not built for Africa. We cannot access it. In fact, what was designed to help developing country is now burdening a developing country because our interest rates are higher, our debt is too high. And I believe that we must focus on what the President has quite correctly said. We must talk about these matters, how we solve the financial crisis that we are in, and it is multifaceted. It is access to funds, it is interest rates, it is the whole classification of middle income, low income, least developed, the whole northwest or developed, non-developed debate, which very consistent and consequentially disadvantages the lower end of the development spectrum. The poorer you are, the more difficult you have it. The richer you are, the easier to have it. And that must be changed. That is a fundamental matter that needs to be changed. But Chair, I know we have not much time, but I do want to highlight some concrete steps that we can immediately take. And it's easy to take if we work together. The first point is illicit outflows out of Africa. The amount of illicit outflows out of Africa is higher than the total development assistance that we get. So if we stop it, we have more than enough money to fund the water sector. I think the figure is 500 billion. That's the figure of illicit outflows out of the African continent. And that is leaving everything else which is unfair and biased towards Africa in place. If we only stop illicit outflows, we will have a substantial gain in our hands. The second point I believe we have to consider, and I think the President also again mentioned it, we are a continent that is endowed with natural resources, minerals, metals, good soils, biodiversity, genetic material, many things that are in need to be developed and have an intrinsic asset value. But wherever you go, that asset is sold for a song. We do not get the commensurate value for it. Honourable Chair, if you ask me what should be the benchmark of where should we settle the price should be settled on our target to become a prosperous continent. It is not what someone else determines the value is. Our value is we want to become a prosperous continent. And as the President said, let's start with a target of a high middle income country status for the whole continent. What does it need when we sell our assets, our minerals, to become a high middle income continent? That is the benchmark of the price of our resources that we should part off with. The same is true for investment opportunities. When we get an investment into green hydrogen or into solar energy or into any carbon-related green industrialization program, the returns of that project must be measured against our ambition to become prosperous as a continent. Not what the perceived risk is, not what the buyer wants to part with, but we must insist that our benchmark is to become prosperous, and that is where the benchmark should be. And if we can develop a common position around that during this interesting and difficult discussion that we may have in the near future, then I believe we have positioned ourselves into a situation where we are fair. To be prosperous is one thing, but that prosperity must be spread equally, so we must also work on inequality measures. So it is not good to be a middle-income country, but the majority is still very poor. So inequality erosion must be very much part of our agenda. So how many jobs do we create? How many decent jobs are those? How many houses do we develop that? How do we develop the African continent that we have a truly dignified and decent living standard for all our citizens? That's the benchmark that we have to look at. And I believe with that, to use the President's words, a whole host of new opportunities will opening up. It is not only the exploitation of the resources, but also the development of the whole continent. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, I believe there is one topic that I believe must be part of that agenda, and that is the topic of political instability and what we do with. Let me turn it around, and I want to use an example. I have yesterday on BBC heard that the rebuilding of the Ukraine will cost something like $400 trillion or something like that. Now, is that war a worthwhile spending of money? Shouldn't we use money that we invest in wars? Should we use that to invest that into the prosperity of our continent? Instead of destroying and rebuilding with the same money, we use money to destroy, we use money to rebuild. We could have been a much better world without funding and fueling instability. The African continent is not an exception. We see a rise in instability politically, and our institutions, in my opinion, lack the decisiveness to deal with that crisis, with that political crisis. It is expensive. We will not achieve our targets for prosperity, for a green industrialization, for a green revolution, for financial finalization of our investment plan, if we carry on fighting wars. In fact, the nice infrastructure that we have built will be destroyed. So political instability is on the rise, and therefore I believe that if we do not throw that into the difficult discussion that we have, we will not achieve much. And I'm saying it not because I'm idealist, I'm saying it because we feel how the financial sector is weaponized. We feel how the trade agenda is weaponized. We feel the agenda, if you are not with us, you are against us. You can do whatever you want. You are part of the war and you pay collateral damage. We all feel the inflation of food prices, of fuel prices now. It is not because we have done anything wrong. It is because there is political instability in some part of the world that needs to be funded. With that, I end my say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Schlittwein. I think we move now to the last but not least speaker in this first section of the session, Her Excellency Honorable Micah van Ginneken, Special Envoy for Water, Kingdom of Netherlands, and also the co-chair of High-Level Panel on Water Investment for Africa, and congratulate her for this very nice job.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends. Water is how climate change manifests itself. Rainfall becomes more erratic, devastating floods are in the news, while droughts cause poverty and hunger in slow motion. Water is also the motor of climate adaptation. Freshwater storage reduces the impact of floods and saves water for dry periods. But storage in glaciers, in wetlands, in man-made reservoirs is in decline. And let's not forget that 99% of freshwater storage is in nature. Groundwater is our prime buffer for climate adaptation. We've heard that there's an annual investment gap of 20 to 30 billion US dollars. We have to close this gap. President Ruto said this morning in the plenary that trillions of dollars are looking for green. Let me expand that. Investors are looking for blue. More financing starts with dependable revenue streams. Governments need to target their public financing and to spend their water budget in a timely manner. With steady revenue streams and with strong institutions, we can mobilize financing, both domestically and internationally. After the successful UN Water Conference in March of this year, the Netherlands is committed to keep the momentum going for the African Investment Plan on Water. We're proud that our Prime Minister is one of the co-chairs of the high-level panel. The Kingdom of the Netherlands, together with the Republic of Tajikistan, has also been invited to champion water at the COP28. I'm very impressed by the climate leadership that Africa shows at this summit here in Nairobi. And we look forward to Africa making its voice heard in Dubai. The Netherlands is ready to partner on an equal basis. This year we will commit around 300 million euro in new grant for water in Africa. Our equal partnership also means we foster trade between our continents. We're looking to invest and we want to learn from you while we make our water knowledge available for Africa. It's time to act now. Let's make financing flow like water. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for this very specific and short speech. Let me highlight 3 points that were mentioned in the first report that launched in the UN Water Conference by the high-level panel on water. It mentioned here, the outline, the 3 pathways to increase the resources available to achieve Africa's ambitious goals on water security and sustainable sanitation, namely, 1, achieve more impactful water spending and leveraging, 2, mobilize domestic resources, and 3, mobilize global and continental investment and finance. Before I end this session, I just want to give each one of the panelists 30 seconds to comment on these 3 issues, including the more impactful water spending and mobilize domestic resources, and also mobilize global and continental investment and finance. So I will start with Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. I think these are the 3 right priorities. We need to see who pays for water and who finances water. First of all, that's a revenue stream. Second, that's looking at domestic resources. And third, that's looking at international resources. I know that if we come together, we can raise this money and we can make a water secure world.
Your Excellency.
Yeah, thank you very much. High or impactful investment in water, and then domestic resource mobilization versus partners mobilization of funding. I think all this speaks to the question, like for Kenya, where we are, the physical space is very constrained. And therefore, for me, I want to see renewed efforts and approaches to financing water than it has been done before. So and then we must manage that water, that resource, in a manner that it is useful, it creates the right impact, and that we then achieve the goals that we have set to achieve. I guess, therefore, I'm saying both local, domestic, international. As a country, we are in a situation where we have called for expression of interest from partners, from investors, from public-private partnerships. And whichever way you look at it, I think that is the way to go for us to meet this gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Schlittwein.
Thank you very much. Yes, one can only but agree with the 3 points, with a few buts. Domestic mobilization is fine and good if we are allowed to generate the necessary revenue out of our resources to do that. Mobilization in the current unbalanced situation is having its limits. Secondly, I believe that domestic mobilization should not shift away the responsibility of those that have caused the crisis to live up to their commitments that they have given to fund the adaptation agenda that comes thereafter. So yes, we have to have the will to solve the global crisis together, and we should avoid offloading the one responsibility or the other to the one or the other. I think we must do everything we can together, because it is an existentialist crisis that we have to face. And that is very true for the water agenda as well. And lastly, we can talk about domestic mobilization, but we must also lift the priority of water, the realization that water is, like the Commissioner has said, actually the quintessence of the outcome of climate change. So if we don't manage to elevate water and the water funding agenda, we will mobilize funds for activities that are not addressing the core problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just would like to add one more example to what was said and also to what Alice, my colleague, mentioned. The situation with the climate change in Egypt is very similar to many other African countries. Egypt is having increasing population, tremendous increasing in the population that exceeded the 1 million inhabitants. At the same time, the increase in temperature is very remarkable in the country, and we feel it now. As a Minister of Water Resources, I feel the demand on water is increasing tremendously, especially last July with a high temperature that was really a new record. But suffering from the climate change is not only within the boundaries of Egypt, but also impact of the climate change in the entire Nile Basin. The 10 Nile Basin countries is impacting Egypt indirectly, because 97% of the dependency on water in Egypt is dependent on the Nile, which is coming from our neighboring brother countries. Any change in hydrological extremes happening in the Nile Basin countries impacting the people in Egypt. But not only that, the increasing of the Mediterranean sea level is also impacting us. Some of these impacts, we see them. We see the erosion in the north coast and the deterioration of the shoreline, but also impacting the quality of our groundwater due to the saltwater intrusion. All of these are some of the few impacts of the climate change. I remember last February that the farmers, starting from December to February, we normally get some drops of rainfall during that period, so it is the only month that we switch off our canal system for maintenance. So this year we did not receive any single rain during that period, and that's why farmers could not tolerate closing the canals, and we have exceptionally to open. All of these are impact. Coming to the investment, the Egyptian government has invested $10 billion over the last 5 years in adaptation to climate change, in canal lining, in using different varieties, moving from surface irrigation to drip and sprinkler irrigation. Many investments, I'm talking about $10 billion in the last 5 years only, have been invested in the water sector just to adapt to climate change. So, with this, I would like to thank the 3 distinguished panelists for their very valuable contribution, and thank you very much. I just want to introduce you to the second part of this section, so we will continue our interesting discussion now with the second panelists. Colleagues, important key action needs to be achieved at the different levels to attract large-scale financing, a framework for engagement of different types of finances and countries is key to attract investment. A crucial need to implement reform and remove the bottleneck that are impeding process. So I would now to invite the panelists of the second part. I'm not sure whether all of them are here. So His Excellency, Honorable Minister Mike Moposo, Minister of Water Development and Sanitation of Zambia, Excellency Honorable Andrea Mitchell, Minister of State in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, UK, Honorable Minister Masuka, Minister of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development, Special Envoy, Zimbabwe. Welcome. Okay, it's okay. Sorry?
15 minutes.
Yeah. Let me start by some questions to the panelists. And let me start by His Excellency Mike Mokhoso, the Minister of Water Development and Sanitation of Zambia. And here we are talking about investment, but what are some of the measures being undertaken by respective countries to attract investment in water? Do you have any examples to give us in successful or successful cases of attracting investments in the sector of water? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. May I quickly just appreciate the presence of my fellow panelists. Chair, to respond to your question on the initiatives that my country is taking to attract investment, I wish to say that learning and borrowing from the Continental Initiative, Chair, we recently developed a program called Zambia Water Investment Program. In the program, we project that we could mobilize the resources to a tune of $5.75 billion United States dollars up to 2030. And in that program, we are looking at improving our cooperation in terms of grants which we receive from our cooperating partners, but also mainly to increase budgetary allocation to the water sector by our government. But beyond that, we are also thinking beyond the traditional financing, which are more focused on budgetary allocation, but to attract more of PPPs to ensure that we invest more in the water and the sanitation sector. So we have in there our focus to attract more of the private sector to partner with the public sector to push in more investment in the sector. Briefly, I thought I should mention those points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So moving to His Excellency Honorable Andrea Mitchell, the Minister of State, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development, UK. What are the pathways to reduce the risks associated with water sector investment and leverage increased funding flows?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Andrew Mitchell. I'm the British Development Minister. It's a great pleasure to be at this important conference. And this is a really important session because we all know we cannot win the fight against climate change or poverty without taking greater control over water. Many of the very interesting points that have been raised here, I hope Britain will make a humble contribution later in the year in a government white paper, which will look both at how we get the SDGs back on course, as well as how we reinvigorate the important points that the President made in his wonderful speech earlier today about getting the fight against climate change back on track. And I thought that what Carl said about the importance of stopping money being stolen from Africa and Africans on illicit finance is incredibly important. And with half of the global population projected to suffer water insecurity by 2050, with potentially as many as 86 million people forced from sub-Sahara in that time frame, we also know that water management could not be more urgent. The challenge for us all is to ensure that societies are equipped to address drought, floods, and poor water quality in an integrated and systems-wide way. It has been estimated by WaterAid that proper investment in water management could be worth at least $500 billion a year to the global economy. It's an investment that would help us to adapt to climate change and also counteract rising temperatures, boost food security, and rejuvenate nature. Adapting to climate change was at the top of our agenda at the British COP26, and we continue to push for urgent and transformative action on all fronts, including water. Chair, with 90% of Africa's water resources shared between countries, the UK has been a long-standing supporter of collaborative water management. We were a founding donor of the Cooperation in International Waters in Africa programme, and I'm pleased to announce that we are in the process of finalising a further £8 million through the UK Africa Regional Climate and Nature programme, with funding for that starting later this year. The British government's Development Finance Institution, which many in this room will know, BII, formerly CDC, which announced at COP27 it intends to invest $200 million into water infrastructure over a 5-year period, has also been a leading driver of private investment into water infrastructure and resilience. And in March, we joined forces with Metito Utilities Limited and established the Africa Water Infrastructure Development Platform, which is backing climate-smart water projects that will increase water security across the continent. During my visit to Rwanda last week, I visited a water treatment plant near Kigali that provides the city with more than a quarter of its drinking water, and which has been one of the first investments under this new platform. British International Investment, BII, will also launch their Care for Water report on Friday, which will set out a new approach to strengthening public-private cooperation on water security in African countries. As you can see by these examples, Britain is contributing collaborative investment in water management, which aims to help overcome climate change and achieve sustainable development. Finally, Chair, it is important that everyone, governments, the development community, and international investors get behind efforts, and we must all do what we can to ensure that they do, but Britain will be right at the heart of helping with this, in terms of funding, in terms of assisting with structures, in intellectual input and problem solving, in partnerships, which is at the heart of all of this, ideas, and in technical assistance. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And then we move to His Excellency Minister Masuka, Minister of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development. And I would like just to ask him about how can we strengthen institutional regulations for water sector investment, incentives and penalties.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleague panelists, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the Zimbabwean delegation to this very important summit. The context in which we contribute in Zimbabwe is that under a background of sanctions, Zimbabwe has adopted a developmental approach to development, and this means that the state becomes a very strong actor and also a very strong facilitator. We're also looking at development finance. Zimbabwe remains open for business, but we're also looking at private-public partnerships to be able to do more. We realize that building resilience in the face of climate change is critical, and therefore we need very strong institutions to drive that change. There's lots of institutional reform that's taking place. We're reviewing our Zimbabwe National Water Act. The Water Act itself is also under review. We're building institutions that are able to drive the change that we are looking at. And that is an example. What we have now done is to be able to harness additional water. We are building 13 dams and putting in $12 billion of our own domestic resources to do so, including conveying water to our second biggest city, Bulawayo, which is 450 kilometers away from the water source. We are also now adding 74,000 hectares of irrigation. We believe water is a constitutional right, but also water is an investment case. Water is an economic enabler. So it is in this context that we've been able to attract additional investment. In Zimbabwe, we have 35,000 villages, individually unbankable. But if you look at them as a collective, we now have been able to mobilize 700 million US to ensure that each village has water. Water is a constitutional right, but additionally that water becomes a source of investment so that no one and no place is left behind as we age towards 2030 of a prosperous and developed upper middle income society. But we are doing much, much more. We want to develop 350,000 hectares of irrigation in Zimbabwe to climate-proof ourselves. So far we have 200,000 hectares. We're looking for another $1.5 billion, and 75% of this mobilization will come from our own domestic resources. But strong institutions are required to undergirdle this sustained development. Climate change is real. The biggest impact will be seen in the rural communities, and it is fair established institutions that will be able to drive that change. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for this contribution. I was asked to invite Mr. Omar Abadi, Deputy Executive Director, UNICEF, to contribute also as one of the panelists. So if you can just join us. Oh, sorry. So, yeah, please give us your contribution on the asked questions and appreciate your participation in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Indeed, it's a great honor to be part of this panel. I know that we are discussing infrastructure and investment, but I want to bring a human face perspective. The Honorable Minister from Namibia said that climate crisis is a water crisis. And I would add it's also child crisis. In fact, the UN Committee for the Convention of Child Rights last week issued a general comment. This is the global legal scholars that review the convention that all member states have signed on, saying that climate change crisis is a child rights crisis. And by calling it child rights crisis, it makes an obligation for member states to do something about it in terms of the adaptation that we've been talking about. I mean, water crisis, yes, but who is affected the most by water crisis? Children, we know, is largely killed. Children die largely because of waterborne diseases and environmental related diseases such as pollution. So by addressing the issue of water, by investing in climate resilience water, we are also addressing the survival of children. That's the perspective that I wanted to bring, Excellency.
Thank you very much. I give an opportunity for 2 questions from the floor. If there is any questions that, if not, it's also fine. We are lagging behind the time. So there is one here and one there, and that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think I've been selected to answer it. I think in Britain we climate-proof all our work, and we're very conscious of that. Domestically, we've done pretty well. We're ahead of all the other G7 countries in implementing the necessary provisions that help us to climate-proof ourselves. Internationally, our Prime Minister has made it clear that by 2026 we will have stood by our promise of providing climate finance to the tune of £11,600 million, £11.6 billion, and we've made a pledge that we will increase adaptation from what it was in 2019, which was $500 million a year. By 2025, we'll have tripled it to 1.5 million. So in terms of the provision of funding, we are doing what we have said we will do. We're deeply, deeply conscious of the importance of identifying, both for those who are funding and for our domestic taxpayers and for everybody else, what the money is spent on and how that money is delivered, and that it is delivered, point that Carl made. It's very important that we do that, but equally it's important that we show everyone the progress that is being made, and that's why we have a particular focus in Britain on adaptation and some of the less developed countries, some of the poorest countries, because there's always a danger in all these things that they miss out in favor of mitigation and middle-income countries.
Thank you very much. There was another last question here.
Thank you, and a very pertinent question indeed. The fact that we are here demonstrates the importance of water in the climate change debate. I think wherever we are, we must contextualize climate change and to indicate that one of the manifestations of the climate change is indeed scarcity or more of that water, perhaps at inappropriate times, leading to the poorest being affected most. So I believe that if we have not done so in the past, we must not look into ourselves and say, why have we not done so? The opportunity is now that we have been able to do so, and from now henceforth, we must ensure that water is its rightful place and its contextual place in the climate change discourse. Thank you.
Yes. There's an exception because I got the red card that I have to leave.
Thank you, Professor. I think there was somebody who talked about de-risking. I just wanted to say that one of the ways to start de-risking water projects, water infrastructure by way of investment is to start applying low interest rates like any other project that goes for funding. Because we cannot say it is social, we cannot say water is not bankable and continue to charge 10%. I mean, we need to rethink of the interest rates to apply, and that's a clear way of de-risking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Maybe a concluding remarks from His Excellency Andrew Mitchin.
Well, I mustn't detain us because I've seen you've got the red card that the session is over and we're all about to be kicked out. I think in respect of the second question about why can't we get it more central, I do think it is central, and I think that sessions like this with what Your Excellencies have said about the importance of it, I think that does help drive it up the agenda. I think that for all the reasons that have been said, we're getting there. And I just want to end on an optimistic note, which is when I was in Rwanda, before I came to Nairobi, in order to prepare for the session, I went specifically to see this water plant, which I described. And it really is a harbinger of what we should be doing, because you're bringing together the tremendous expertise in providing clean water, which Matito Utilities provide. You're bringing together the work of the investor, the British DFI, one of the most successful and effective investors in the developing world, British Investment International, and you're bringing together the drive of the government to get this done, to corral it. So those three elements have delivered in a timely way and an efficient and effective way water for over 500,000 people in Kigali. And I thought that that model showed both the determination which is coming out of these climate discussions this year and also the effectiveness of delivery on the ground. And we're after all in the season now of all these different summits which are taking place in the run-up to COP. It's a pivotal year and these voices will be heard. And I think that the way this is being championed is very important, nowhere more so than with water.
Thank you very much for all the audience, also for our panelists. We have to leave you, but please stay because there is another set of panelists will come here on the floor. Thank you very much. Enjoy the day.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. We can now take our seats here, and we have the last panel discussion. So in the meantime, while the panelists come on the stage, Joseph may just play our intro on the high-level panel video, and we invite the other panelists to come to the stage. We still have about another 20 minutes to go, and then we have a final communique in 20 minutes, so please take your seats. The ministers are still here. They're just leaving the stage to give the room to the next panel of experts. Joseph? In the meantime, you can go ahead and introduce the high-level panel report as was launched at the high-level panel conference. Please go ahead. And the experts, please come to the stage.
ready? Okay, good. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being with us on this panel. My name is Serene Malik. I'm the Executive Secretary of the African Civil Society Network on Water and Sanitation and the Vice Chair of SWA. It is my pleasure to introduce this fantastic panel today, even though they just have 2 minutes. But today we're going to hear from Dr. Toela Jerry, Head of Economic Integration, NEPAD, Dr. Hubert Danso, Chair, African Union Continental Business, Joseph Daniel Insightful, Senior Climate and Early Warning System, Green Climate Fund, Mr. Mohammed Said, Climate Finance Specialist, Development Bank of Southern Africa, Willis Sumbai, Chief Executive Officer, Kenya Water Sector Fund, Mr. George Odhiambo, Managing Director of National Bank of Kenya, and Mr. Sylvester Matemu, Executive Director, Nile Basin Initiative. So we've heard in summary this morning that climate is a risk multiplier and water is a resilience amplifier. We've also heard that from my president this morning that this is a milestone moment for the continent and to kickstart collaboration and really sorting out the problems. So against that background, I'm going to invite Dr. Toela just to give us, within 2 minutes, where do you see some of the challenges and what are the opportunities that you see? Over to you, Dr. Toela.
Thank you very much and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to start, I think, just briefly by extending the apologies of our CEO who was meant to have spoken in the morning, but had other engagements to attend to. But maybe just 1 or 2 things that she had wanted to emphasize and reiterate in the context of this discussion today. I think the first one is to really acknowledge the work of the high-level panel on water investments in Africa and the report that was produced, and then also to acknowledge the work that AUD and NEPAD has been doing with various partners on the Africa Water Investment Program, and I think some of the products of that are the things that we are seeing today. Really from our side as AUD and NEPAD, our role is to really help in terms of defining this pipeline of water projects that can be bankable and investable. And I think much has been said about the things that need to be done in terms of doing that. We're very concerned, I think, about the fact that perhaps there is very little funding that is directed to project preparation in order to make those projects bankable. And I think one of our continuing appeals is to really see how do we establish dedicated pools of funds that are sustainable and that can be applied to project preparation financing so that we can actually see this bankable pipeline of projects. The second thing, perhaps in the context of the discussion around water projects and climate actions and adaptation, I think we are very clear in terms of our approach to infrastructure development in the context of PIDA to make sure that we are making the links between the various modes of infrastructure, so whether it's water, energy, ICT, and transport, there are clear linkages between those, both in terms of how we approach the issues of adaptation and mitigation, but it's also important, I think, to make sure that we are making those links between water security and climate action, because that helps us in terms of how we attract financing, but also in terms of the transition to a carbon neutral, water secure and resilient future. And then lastly, just to mention an example of a project that we have worked on that actually demonstrates this, and this is a cross-border project between 2 countries, between Kenya and Uganda, which is the Angololo Multipurpose Water Resources Development Project, done together with the NELSAP. And I think this project basically demonstrates how you can actually take a water project and embed different components into that project so that you're able to deal with issues of the energy supply, issues of irrigation and water access, and also issues of how the water is actually utilized and managed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toela. Mea culpa, I forgot to introduce Benson Goma, who is sitting in for Mr. Oswald Chanda. My apologies, Benson. Principal Officer, East Africa Region, African Development Bank. Benson, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, honorable ministers and all colleagues. From the African development perspective, we wanted to present 4 issues that needs to be taken beyond to help in trying to access water sector finance. We must commend governments like presented by Zambia here, where beyond the policy and the strategy you have, you do also have a program, a water program that you'll be using to mobilize resources. Now beyond that, from the African development perspective, we would want to promote and also urge governments not to make those projects bankable in the way that you, apart from having a program, the government should also undertake feasibility studies, and also, if you can manage, to have preliminary designs so that when investors come, you are able to demonstrate that this program, apart from being listed in your priorities, but you are able to demonstrate that this is a bankable project. So this is one element that we have seen from the finance perspective, to say that we have seen countries, they have programs, yes, but they have not gone beyond to demonstrate that those projects are bankable. So that's one element. The second element that we have seen from our side as African Development Bank is that there's little or limited financing from the climate windows. There are so many financing windows out there, but we have seen that many governments are not aware in the first place, but secondly, how to access them. So we need also to urge governments in Africa to say that they need to come up with expertise within the ministries where they can be able to access this financing. So that's a second element. The third element is to say that there is little knowledge that is training in the water sector financing itself. And because there's little knowledge that is circulating, governments are not aware. And this is also another aspect that we want to promote as African Development Bank. The last one on the same is to say that we have noted there's a lot of level of fragmentation in the countries. There are many agencies involved, and because of that, you are not able to leverage the resources that are there. So as I end my 2 minutes,
Thank you.
as I end my 2 minutes, what we wanted to say, there are three key elements, three players in the financing. There's the government, there's development partners, but there's also a private sector element. From the government perspective, the African Development Bank would like to promote, apart from like the minister from Namibia, to diversify mobilization of domestic financing, but let the projects be bankable, demonstrate that the projects are bankable. Secondly, apart from mobilizing domestically, but also go out and know what are the financing that are in the climate window. There are so many windows that are there that needs to be. The third one is to encourage capital efficiency in the sector. When we receive the resources or when we access resources in the sector, I think government should be able to demonstrate the efficiency on how they are using those resources. Now coming to the development partners where we fall in as African Development Bank, is to say that we need also to reorient our support towards improving efficiency, but also creditworthiness of the institutions, particularly the parastatals that are working in it. And lastly, because of my time, I just wanted to say that we also need to facilitate blended financing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benson. And this is a perfect segue to our next speaker, Dr. Hubert Dancer, on issues of bankability, financing, creditworthiness, de-risking, and leveraging partnerships. Over to you.
In 2 minutes, I understand.
In 2
Is that
minutes.
right? Well, look, and, I had the pleasure of chairing the institutional investor task group that was, providing input into the investment action plan. And there are a number of things that sort of come up, but I think we've touched on them. I think the Honourable Minister's touched on them in terms of we need a new form of partnership. And, these conversations are really, they need to be frank and fair. And as institutional investors, we have very specific mandates. So we have to make sure that pensions get met. We have to ensure that future generations' endowments are delivered. So investability is really important to us. And I think what we really need to think about doing is how do we recharacterize the agenda? And I think the agenda has become very much a development finance agenda when it should actually potentially be a blended investment agenda. And I think if we can redefine that agenda, we will be able to crowd in more capital. I think, a lot of our colleagues talk about it in terms of the development community is trying to make investment developmental. And then you have a narrow set of opportunities. But perhaps what might give you a bigger, broader, scalable opportunity is to make development investable. And then you not only have access to the institutional money, but you have access to the global markets as well. And then African domestic institutional investors can then seed and anchor transactions and then crowd in bigger, broader players. So we really welcome the fact that the institutional investor public partnership framework, which is part of the African Union's 5% agenda, was highlighted in the initial report, because that looks at a new form of alignment between long-term institutional capital and domestic water-related infrastructure and resilient infrastructure investment needs. So that particular institutional investor public partnership is something that I think we should all really look into a lot more closely, because it gives specific alignment between long-term institutional assets and the types of projects that we're working on now, in particular water and water-resilient assets. So we identified 4 very specific areas that we believe as the institutional investment community we can help popularize that approach and then really figure out how we can seed and anchor some of these transactions and then crowd in climate finance, blended investment and the like. So one of the first actions there was to really help the implementation of these institutional investor-public partnerships by advising on qualifying the pipeline of bankable water investment projects. I think if we asked everyone on this panel, we would all have a different perspective about bankability relative to our own mandates. So we can't just say private sector and then all of a sudden it's everybody. So if we talk about institutional investors, we have a very specific mandate, a very specific focus in terms of risk and climate adjusted returns, and we can actually help filter what we think would be most appropriate for us to be able to support. Sorry, Minister, I'm going to, if you're still here, I'm going to mention that word de-risking. It is really important. We have a very serious and very underestimated de-risking financing gap. If, on average, about 1/3 of a financing or an investment would tend to need some form of de-risking. Now, if you then think about, I don't know, $3 trillion worth of nationally determined contribution projects, what's 1/3 of that? If you then look at what's the capacity of the de-risking instruments in the market to crowd in that type of finance, you have ATI, $400 million balance sheet. You have, Go Global. You have the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, $60 billion balance sheet. So there's over $500 billion worth of de-risking gap before we even get anywhere else. So I think it's really important that we really try to figure out how to innovate. I can see the Minister leaning forward. You may have some perspectives on that. 500 billion, sir? Yeah. Right. Yes. But I think we need to really get some practicality into where the gaps are. And then I think we can actually really play a bigger role. And then lastly, we have until 2030, according to the panel, to mobilize this 10 billion from institutional investors each year. So we're going to need to use new technologies to be able to crowd in institutional investors. And there are a number of deal rooms and investor intermediation technologies that we think should really be incorporated in the practice and the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Danso. And yes, you've taken a massive problem and tried to at least break it down in bits for us, at least a good start.
It takes a village.
Yes, it does. Okay, I understand we need to be done within 5 minutes. So Lillian from GCF, please let's keep it very short now. Over to you.
Let me get my microphone. All right, so I'll try to be very brief. My name is Lillian Machari. I work with the Green Climate Fund based in South Korea. I think I'll just speak a little bit more to what has already been said. First, from our perspective, I think I've had queries around whether we take water as part of climate, part of the climate agenda, and I'd like to assure all our members that we are actually, all colleagues here, that water is one of our key result areas, and we actually have funding dedicated towards that. And we track how much we are channeling towards water and food security. So we do know that climate impacts are multifaceted, and water is critical and is part of that. And again, just to say, to date, we have a portfolio of about 12.8 billion that's already been approved, of which we have about 880 million dedicated towards Africa. Africa is part of our priority target areas. We have least developed countries, we have Africa, and we have small island development states. And we are therefore making a lot more efforts to make sure that we reach those vulnerable communities who actually suffer the impacts of climate impact, but they don't have as much support in that regard. Now that brings me to the next point about affordability and making sure that we can support that. So we provide a bit more of the de-risking by mixing blended finance, providing grants so that we can make sure that the debt interest rate that's being asked for is lower, because we actually provide some cushion for most investors. And I think that's a lot more we are doing in that area. And finally, we are country driven. So whatever we do is what the countries prioritize. So as much as there's a lot of questions about what the partners do, I think it's also up to us as countries to determine what are key priorities, what do we put them for them funding, and then with that, we stand by to support and provide this assistance. I see I'm being told I'm time out. Just want to say one last thing. We are finally getting into a second replenishment, which will then help us be able to provide support to all the developing countries. Last time we had about 10 billion. We are hoping we can get 12 billion. So if you get some, enhance the vision in the replenishment, we can be able to afford more money to deploy, and we have a very healthy risk appetite to support countries get affordable financing and try new innovative methods to address the financing gap, especially in all the areas, including the water sector. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lillian. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Mohammed Said from Climate Finance Specialist, Development Bank of Southern Africa. Mohammed, over
Thank
to you.
I'll try and be very brief.
Thank you.
I think Lillian spoke about some important areas around using global climate finance mechanisms, and I just wanted to touch on just two examples, but look at the ingredients we've used to mobilize private sector finance to build climate resilience in the water sector. So the one example is a water reuse program in South Africa, which was recently approved by the Green Climate Fund. It was the largest adaptation investment by the Green Climate Fund to date, and we were quite happy that Africa is the recipient of those funds. The important aspects around that approach is we need to look at water as a new asset class. I think that's quite key. And secondly, trying to see how we can adopt a programmatic approach to water investment rather than looking at individual projects. So the programmatic approach, allows us to use standardized agreements. It makes it much easier for municipalities, especially under-resourced municipalities, to get into, to support and implement water reuse infrastructure. And then, as mentioned earlier, there's a strong need for preparation support. We need funding to help municipalities, especially those that cannot develop bankable feasibility studies. And we were fortunate through the Green Climate Fund to have preparation support, for that. And last but not least, blended finance solutions. So we use concessional finance from the likes of Green Climate Fund, blended with other sources, and the funding from climate finance is very much catalytic, and the intention is with time the sector would mature and you can look at alternative financing mechanisms. I just wanted to mention 10 seconds. We've also worked on a project with the Global Water Partnership, as well as the SADC Secretariat, around a regional initiative to strengthen early warning systems and climate information, which is quite key to develop climate resilient water investment programs. So we're quite happy that this is embedded in the Africa Investment Program, and hopefully over the next few years we are able to advance that particular initiative and ensure resilience of the water sector in Southern Africa in particular.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed. Next, I'd like to invite our very own Willis Ombai, Chief Executive Officer, Water Sector Trust Fund. Willis, over to you.
Thank you. I don't know how many minutes I have.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Yes.
So thanks for this invitation and the honor to speak here. because I think we are one of the Kenya national institutions which is involved in mobilizing resources for investment in the water sector. Maybe just to tell you how much we have done, we have mobilized since the inception around 50 million US dollars, which I think by our standard is a significant amount of money, working with the county governments and various institutions across the country and implementing projects which are climate friendly. I want to recognize, because our main role is mobilization of resources, is that of we have been able to get money or funds mainly from World Bank, KfW, Danida, many, Danida, Finland, and these are appreciative partners that we have worked with. In terms of climate change or climate financing, we are currently pursuing opportunities from Green Climate Fund, and so because the representation is here, we really look at that. As lastly, our role in public-private partnership is really viability gap financing and also working on last mile connectivity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Willis. I would like now, we've talked about bankability and banks. Yes. Mr. George Odhiambo, over to you from National Bank of Kenya. 1 minute.
Thank you so much, distinguished delegates. Mine is very brief. I'll spend the first 20 seconds to say who we are. National Bank of Kenya is part of KCB Group. We do business across Africa. East coast of Africa, you find us as Zanzibar, to the west coast at the port city of Mwanda in DRC. So what we are doing in Kenya as National Bank of Kenya in terms of promoting inclusive water investment will be spread across Africa, cutting across the Central Africa. As National Bank of Kenya, we work with partners. We are very honored to have partners from the Kingdom of Netherlands who've committed 25 million euro in this country. 40% of that passes through National Bank of Kenya in terms of investment through water service providers. We've also opened a discussion with the African Development Bank to consider similar funding at upstream level so that we can work it down to the real beneficiaries. We're also talking about de-risking, and the Honorable Minister and I have had that discussion previously. It's not de-risking that we're supposed to stop people from accessing clean water and sanitation. It's about us knowing exactly what KPIs we are dealing with. And lastly, I would like to talk about the impact that we've set on ourselves for the last 2 years to reach out to 600,000 families. We are 80% of that, and we're happy to see this panning out through county governments. In Kenya, there are 48 governments, the national, and 47 county governments whom we work with very closely. So from this discussion, I'll be looking forward to more partnerships. We're looking for more funding, more technical assistance, and more research in innovative solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. George Odhiambo. And finally, Mr. Sylvester Matemu, Executive Director, Nile Basin Initiative. And you close this panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I have half a minute.
Yes, you do.
I have summarized, and I don't know what to summarize. But I have 3 key messages in terms of presentation. First one is that river basin organizations are the key and important building blocks to take this agenda forward. In Africa, we have 19 river and lake basins, Nile being one of them, and is the top, the third largest in terms of area, followed by Congo and the Amazon. So Nile has a role to play here. 2, in this agenda, we have our strategy. The issues of climate change is not new to our area. We have a strategy we are implementing, and we find the way forward is to have a water and climate coalition. I do not like to explain about this because of the time. Water and climate coalition. Last one. What are we doing at the river basin level? And because Nile Basin is representing the 19 river and lake basin organizations in Africa, we have developed tools. One is a manual for climate proofing. Second, we are having what we call data analytic services for the countries. And by using these informations, building capacity, it makes the countries to make scientific decisions. This is what I can say. Pay the bill now or we'll pay dearly in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvester. I'd like to invite back Alex for the next session. Thank you to our panelists. Well done. Thank you.
Kindly remain on the, remain.
Do they remain? Okay.
Yes, you kindly just remain. Our chair is going to close the session now and summarize the key outcomes and the next steps. I think from the high-level panel secretariat and also from on behalf of the high-level panel alternate co-chair, His Excellency President Jakaya Kikwete, who could not join us here. Just want to thank the African Union Commission, as well as AUDA NEPAD, the Republic of Kenya, the minister, as well as the honorable ministers that are here, as well as, of course, our own professor from Egypt, the Minister of Water, and also President of the African Ministerial Council of Water. So for now, thank you for your patience. We did mention that we started late, but actually we are only over by 5 minutes, if we count from where we started. So we've done really very well. Honorable Minister, it is now your duty to take forward and inform us on the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I also appreciate the panelists and the very interesting session, and thank the Secretariat for preparing this kind of communique as an output of this session. So there is a background, of course, and the document is available if anyone would like to read it. But here, we, the partners, call upon heads of government, the international community, UN agencies, development finance institutions, international organizations, private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders in Africa and globally to strengthen public-private institutional investor partnerships for water. Second, urge the member states to adopt and implement the recommendation of the high-level panel report on Africa's rising tide, how to mobilize 30 billion US dollars annually to achieve water security and sustainable sanitation in Africa. 3, urge to enhance collaboration and improve the enabling environment for preparation of a pipeline of agreed investable, bankable projects that accounts for the socio-economic and environmental considerations to meet the needs of public-private institutional investor partnerships, address climate change impacts toward the achievement of SDG 6 water-related targets and socio-economic needs of the continent. 4, urge the member states to adopt mutually agreed, mutually beneficial, no-harm-based water-related adaptation policies while promoting the co-benefits of adaptation and to build on the water-related outcomes and the initiatives of COP27, such as Pan-Africa Center for Water Adaptation, PACWA, which reflects the importance of water, both a key climate change challenge and a potential solution. 5, urge member states to develop national climate resilience water investment programs and promote integration of water into economy. 6, urge to cooperate and establish an Africa water investment partnerships to strengthen public-private institutional investor partnerships, increase collaboration in mobilizing investment for member states on the continent through matchmaking the supply of capital and the demand for finance. 7, recommend that the Africa Union Commission and high-level panel secretariat and development partners strengthen public-private institutional investor partnerships. 8, recommend the African Union and the Africa Climate Summit adopt the communique as part of the summit declaration to accelerate implementation of climate-resilient water investments on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Ministers. So we have come to the end of the session. So as we close, the Honorable Ministers are invited for a group photo, upstanding right here. Just the Honorable Ministers. The session is officially over, and thank you to the panelists. You are now allowed to leave the panel. Thank you. Group photo for the Honorable Ministers. Group photo for the honorable ministers, please. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to now start the second session. Apologies again because we are still running late, but our session on adaptation, the adaptation initiative, is about to start now. I'm going to ask our panelists for this session to keep it brief so that we do not run over. And thank you so very much for all the ministers who graced us with their presence today, all our experts who are here this morning. Thank you very much for your insights and your pledges. And we hope to hear the outcomes at the end of this summit. So now I'm going to call on the team for Africa Adaptation Initiative. We would like them to keep it to at least an hour, if that is possible, because the next session will be looking at the significant needs and opportunities for accelerating adaptation across the African continent. It will shine light on knowledge, capacity, and finance, and the need for adaptation, discussing how action is already being mobilized, how opportunities for further investments to improve the resilience of people and economies, and it's about getting resources where it is needed the most. May I now call upon Kulthum Omari to lead this session on adaptation initiative, and then she will call members of her panel to come on a stage. Thank you. Welcome. Okay.
Thank you, MC, and honorable ministers, distinguished guests. Welcome to this session on adaptation. I would like to invite my panelists, before I introduce this session, to come and join us on the podium. So I'm going to start by asking our panelists with Honorable Minister Yasmin Faoud, Minister of Environment, Egypt. Could you please, if you're here, if you could come and join us on the podium. Honorable Minister Ibrahim Munir, Minister of Environment, Libya. If you're here, please join us on the panel. Honorable Minister Michael Usi, Minister of Natural Resources and Climate Change, Malawi. If you could also join us on the panel. Wow. I think there's another event happening with the honorable ministers, so I think we can go to the next one. Honorable Minister Khadija Mohammed, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Somalia. Do we have her? You're representing the minister. Please come through. Honourable Minister Ian Ryan, Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Communications, Ireland. Please come through to the podium. and Miko Olikane, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, head of the Adaptation Fund, please come to the podium. Apologies, we're just making some last minute changes. As you know, we were delayed slightly, so we will make some changes. I do have my co-moderator, perhaps moderator Mugo Kibati, CEO of Kenya, Telecom Kenya. Perhaps you can join us, then we can have a combined panel. I think that might work better, given that some of the ministers had to leave. Do you want to join me and we could facilitate and moderate this session together? You are, after all, my partner in crime. So I'm going to combine, if you have the program, I'm going to combine the two panels because we're having some challenges with some of the ministers. I'm going to call on Ambassador Mahi Boumediene from Algeria. Apologies if I am mispronouncing your name. Please come on stage. And we're happy to be joined by Honorable Ian Ryan from Ireland, Honorable Minister for Environment, Climate and Communications from Ireland. This is called adaptation. Yeah. Sincerely, adaptation at work. We're showing you how adaptation is done. We are adapting to the environment as it evolves. So we didn't have some of the ministers before because they're in another session. What we've started to combine, but then it actually looks like we have a very good panel. We have 4 panelists right now, so we'll continue that way. But we'll make it shorter and crisp and finish within 30 minutes for the first panel. And then the second panel, we will get it to the next session. It will be another 30 minutes. But I do understand that we do have a minister from Finland who would like to speak in this panel. And if I can invite the Honorable Minister Pasi Helman, yes, Deputy Minister for Cooperation in Finland. If I can just invite him quickly because he's asked to speak on this panel instead. Please, Honorable Minister, thank you. So, now we are all here and we will be very quick, 5 minutes intervention. So, Right, as I was introduced, my name is Kuthum Omar Mutumi, and I'm going to be your moderator from the Africa Adaptation Initiative. Before I introduce my panelists once again and give them the floor, I just want to take a few minutes to go through the journey, the adaptation journey, because it's important, and we're all here, we all understand what adaptation is, but I think it's important when we speak with our panelists to understand how we have evolved with adaptation. So very quickly, we know that the impacts are there and we've been feeling them, particularly in the continent of Africa, but there have been important milestones in adaptation where we have seen that ambition has been made, commitments have been made to support adaptation in the continent. I'll give an example. In 2019, when we had in Copenhagen, where we committed through the decision in Copenhagen to the $100 billion per year on adaptation and mitigation. That's an important milestone. So we're not starting from scratch. In Glasgow, we committed to doubling adaptation finance from 2019, I think to the tune of 40 billion per year. So we're not starting from scratch. There's been significant commitments globally to support adaptation in the continent. And more recently, we've got the Global Goal on Adaptation, which has been launched in Paris, and we are working as negotiators and African experts on elaborating the Global Goal on Adaptation. We're actually going to conclude that work. Now, given that we've made so much significant progress, as well as these key milestones on adaptation, we are still feeling the impacts of climate change. And adaptation, IPCC is telling us that actually we're lagging behind. So I have my panelists here who are going to talk to us through why are we going in that path? What do we need to do more? I would like this panel to be more solutions-oriented. We know what the impacts are, but what do we need to do differently? What do we need to do more? How do we enhance this? And I'm very happy to be joined by my distinguished panelists. And I'll start, given that the panelists have changed. I will start with So we will be also joined by our distinguished Minister of Environment from Egypt, Honorable Yasmin Faoud. Thank you. Okay, this panel is getting bigger and bigger. This is great. Again, we are adapting. Now, I was going to start with her, but I'll give her a few minutes to just settle in. So I'll start with Somalia. Can I start with you? Now, Somalia, I'll give you the floor and you can speak for 3 minutes, but I would like you to just focus a little bit more on the challenges of climate adaptation, particularly in addressing food security. We have heard a lot about the drought and the famine that is in Somalia, and particularly that you are the horn, you are the epitome of the Horn of Africa, and the impacts are real. What can you tell us in 3 minutes around the impacts, and what is needed to address this challenge? Over to you.